Okay, and then we also have captioning on as well. Well, thanks again for introducing yourselves, ladies. To get started, we're gonna kind of get started with a icebreaker question. So just around today, in the panel, anyone were to describe how it feels to be here today, and we can start with you, Natasha.
I'll say empowering.
And we can go to Melissa.
That was my word, so I'm gonna say inspired.
You have to have just one like profound word because empowering is going to be it. I think I am proud to be here today.
That's beautiful. Thank you. And then what does Indigenous Peoples Day mean to each of you? So looking at the day and how that feels, and what does it look like for each of you? And we'll stay with the kind of rotation of Natasha, Melissa, and Erica, if that's okay.
I think it's a long ways coming. I think for far too long it was celebrated as a otherly named holiday. I won't name it. But I think that it's a long time coming, and it's about time that we kind of really deal with the truth and the actual history of what really went on. And so I'm really proud that we are actually celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day as opposed to the other one.
To me, it's a day about, right, as a mom, I think really just being able to share this with my kiddos, not only in the work I do, but also, what we do in the community and how we live in Minneapolis and the vibrant Native community here, but also, who we are as Indigenous people. I just came from another presentation. And so really thinking about, right, how I grew up and not having this day, but the latter, right, that Natasha had mentioned. And so also taking it a step further, like thinking about the elementary I went to in South Dakota was called Annie Talent. And so, knowing it had changed after graduation because of the individual who was racist, but also learning then, take it a step further that, during the Sioux Treaty, she was one of the non-natives who went on to the Black Hills when that treaty was there. So seeing and just hearing that. So just to see that I can give this information to my kiddos and teach them, I think is an honor in itself. So thankful for this day.
I'll say that acknowledging the day is a start. I think this country is still has so much more to do to reconcile our histories with what still goes on today. I'll say, like Melissa, I have children, 3 small children, and one of them emailed me while she was in class, upset that her teacher still referred to it as the colonizer's name and not Indigenous Peoples Day. And I felt really proud of her for acknowledging that it was wrong, reaching out to her mother, who she knew would be able to go back and advocate. I think, just a few short years ago, we weren't listened to in the same way. So we wouldn't even imagined, especially in the state that I'm in, imagined that we could contact the school and even address those concerns. So I would say that I'm very happy with the fact that we're able to acknowledge, but I believe that we have so much more to do. This is just the beginning. So thank you.
Thank you all. Loved hearing from all of you on what that means for you differently as well. The next question is, starting off, tell us about your experience through higher education and how culture influenced your educational journey.
I feel like some of these are really good thesis topics. I'm just saying, you could write a whole paper on some of these questions. So these questions were really thought out. I appreciate that. My experience through higher education, it was a journey. I wouldn't say it was smooth sailing all the way. I would say that there were definitely ups and downs. There were definitely times where it came to a complete stop. But the way that my culture influenced me was my great grandma Mary Jane Eagleman. She she lived until I was about 20 years old, and her biggest platform was education and embracing the education and being able to take it and like better yourself, better your communities, and better make kind of like pave the way for the future, especially our future students, our kids, our future generations. And so the biggest thing that she told me was finish, and so with that, I always knew that I needed to finish. I needed to complete that that promise that I made her to complete college. And that was the biggest drive for me, was just knowing that my obligation to promises really outweigh a lot of other things, especially when it's your great grandma. You really gotta honor those wishes, and especially since those that came before us really, they kind of suffered a lot for the freedoms that we have today. And so I'm trying to embrace that, what I can, and take it with me, and hopefully open a lot more pathways for those that are coming behind me.
I feel like I could just say ditto. My higher ed experience, and again, let me just share, I have a bachelor's in arts in child psychology from the University of Minnesota. So coming from, Rapid City, South Dakota, which is, I would consider rural, to the University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus, which is huge, right? Navigating that huge campus, being away from home, considering myself a mama's girl who grew up in an alcoholic home, like what was that transition, and thinking back on that, and not having that social, emotional well-being, that connection, and, expressing that. So looking at my first 2 years was just a lot of like going to classes, getting to know the students, but also at the U of M had opportunities for Native students, like the Learning Resource Center, the Student Cultural Center. So there was space for us, at that time, was what we thought was best. And so seeing how much change has happened at the University of Minnesota and other institutions, and how much more there could and should be for Indigenous students in a place that was never meant for us. I look back and think, I still finished my degree in 4.5 years, despite, losing grandparents in that time, having, things as Native people that we're not immune to, suicide attempts, stuff like that. And so being able to see the resiliency that we sometimes don't talk about, but that we just know it's inherent in us, I think is powerful. And, things like these platforms where we can talk about that. So yeah, that's my undergrad experience.
So my undergrad, it took me roughly like more than 7 years to finish. And I want to tell that, I'm not like bragging it took me 7 years, but I like to tell that story and that journey, because so many of our students do stop out so often. So the first year I went away, and when I say away, like the college was like almost an hour away from my home, and I still felt like, oh, this is ridiculous. I like need to get back home. So after a year I left, and then I just like bounced around, like trying to get myself to feel motivated again, because once you stop out, there's like this weight that hangs over you, like I couldn't get it done, I didn't do it. And I think so many of us expect like that. I didn't have parents at the time. They ended up going back to school, but at the time we didn't have generations of people going off to college to even talk about it in a positive way. And so they knew they wanted all 4 of us, my siblings, to get the education. They talked about it. They made sure that we knew it was a priority. But I think when it started happening for me, and I wasn't just immediately successful, and all of those obstacles were like weighing down, I just kept stopping out. And then there would be the anxiety of like not going into withdrawal. And so I allowed myself to get withdrawal failings like every other year. And I think like both of the panelists, I have family who obviously are ancestors and still are family today that are struggling with oppression and racism. And, I felt like my people are still fighting 500 years later for their land. I can't just fight to finish my education. And so I had to keep reminding myself that there was like a reason why we have to do this, that our people have had it so much worse than what I'm experiencing now. And, you know, I had to keep going. So I took 7 years, multiple dropouts, multiple withdrawal failings, multiple, I can't do this. My family was supportive. Everyone around me was supportive. They just didn't have the same experience. You know, they didn't have an education. So I think that's how I just convinced myself to just keep going, because well, what other choice do we have is to just keep going. So that's my experience.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to welcome anybody else that has joined the panel. We have gotten started, and then we will have opportunity at the end. I see that there's a few questions in the chat, but to get through some of the questions we have planned out for today, we'll get started with those first, and then at the end there'll be some opportunity for you to connect with the panelists and ask a few of those questions, and so I'll open that up at the end. The next question we're going to go into is, what techniques did you use to manage your time while navigating school, in addition to your social, emotional well-being, as well as your cultural identity?
Well, my educational journey, I kind of look at it as two different phases. The first phase, I was very young. I had no kids. I had zero idea how to navigate through higher education. Mentors were few and far between, and that's when it just came to a complete stop. But going out into the working world and, you know, getting jobs that weren't exactly up my alley or for me, really made me realize, and also having a kid really kind of made me realize I need more, I can do more. And so phase 2, I told myself, I'm going to school, I'm going to every class this time. I promise every class I'm going to be there, and I'm going to actually do the readings, I'm going to actually do the homework. And it was really hard to do that because I was balancing between also being a mom, and he was really young at the time. He was probably 5 or 6 years old. And so, but that also kind of drove me to like, you can't fail. You gotta keep going, girl. You gotta kick it into gear and get that paper done. And I kind of found out that I was like, oh, wow, I can actually kind of do this work. I understand now, because I think in phase 1 was more or less coming out of survival mode. I don't know if anyone ever had that, but more or less I was just basically surviving in phase 1. Phase 2, I was actually kind of living life. And so this kind of drove me to, you know, really be disciplined about making it to class, making sure that I took the notes, making sure that I deleted my social media off of my phone. That was a big thing. No Facebook. If I had time to Facebook, that means I had time to read or study or write a paper. So, but then on top of that, I was like, I'm also not going to get involved. For some reason, I like to get really involved in like groups, and I find myself being presidents of clubs that I never intended on being in. And I did my best to avoid it, but I was roped into being on student senate. But that also helped me plan, you know, like social events, kind of family orientated. And luckily I was going to Salish Kootenai College, which is one of the tribal colleges, shout out TCUs in Montana. And when you're in the tribal college setting, you get a lot of what you would be like non-traditional students. So a lot of us were parents there. And so being able to navigate parenting and kind of like social life while you were a student was really helpful, because you had a network of people that were kind of in the same boat as you. So that was really helpful. But yeah, I think being in that type of setting at a tribal college really helped me kind of get through phase 2 and finish phase 2.
Yeah, thinking about, again, like looking at the question, right? Thinking about how we're navigating that in addition to that social, emotional, and well-being. Again, looking at the time frame of when I was in college, right? We didn't have social media. I'm like, I don't think we even had MySpace. So like, again, like what applies to this conversation that can help students that are on the call? Because too, back then, like mental health wasn't something we should all partake in, right? It isn't what it is today, where it's just so there and the focus of so much in such a good way, and then connecting your culture to that, because it was more like you should see a counselor, and it's like, oh, like taboo back then, right? And then I feel old right now. But also, like, coming to a university, being 8 hours from home wasn't just, you didn't, you had to have a phone to call. And I think about not just the classes, but what was that opportunity to network, to socialize, because as Native people, we are social, right? And that made the hugest difference, I think, in creating some of those friendships that I still have today with that group of friends that, all went to school as Native people at that time at the University of Minnesota, and who are still here in our community working. And then I think about, I just remember this being assigned to my college or campus person that was to help me look at my classes and what was I going to pick. Somehow I let her talk me into thinking I could be a pre-calc teacher. And that in chemistry, again, like, how do you know what these students are, right? Other than reading their GPA and what they got into college for, like, man, how do we really help students be successful so that they see it from the start of being successful versus like, somebody's journey taking longer when it could have been shorter, and like seeing, because I took classes my freshman, sophomore year that were the requirements, but then it's like, cool, pre-calc, I was done in a month, and like, nope, not my path anymore. Chemistry, not my path. And so now that I look back and like how I was a learner, what ways were successful for me to learn, and a lot of it was not there at the U. And then I think too about that cultural identity, again, having those connections, being exposed to the University of Minnesota and what those resources were, and those Native organizations here in Minneapolis made the biggest difference. It was that safe space. There was the Learning Resource Center that had that opportunity to smudge, to laugh, to talk, to, at that time we even had a elders advisory group that would come and sit with us once a month. And so just seeing, or being able to just come and breathe, whether we had something going on or not, but between classes, after classes, was just that safe space for us. And I think that probably was some of the most opportune time for me to have gotten through that college experience.
I'm going to just keep it honest. If I took 7 years and barely made it through, I didn't really know how to navigate at that time. So I'll talk about what I learned, I guess. My advice for those that are still doing it or will be doing it soon. I think there was a lot of not knowing that went around my first journey. And I liked how Natasha put it in like 2 different types of educational journeys. My undergrad, it was like, I am so thankful I survived. And then by the time I was going through my master's and my doctorate, I was married and having children and had different priorities, more, still stressed, still many things to navigate. I think the not knowing when you're young and going through undergraduate is hard, and we are afraid to ask questions at that time. We're afraid to say we don't know. We're afraid to like ask for the help. So I would say those going through this now, like, find whomever it is you need to connect with on campus. TCUs are amazing for this purpose. PWIs, as Melissa mentioned, are getting better with their resources for Native students. When we went to school, I'm not going to tell my age either, but many of those things didn't exist, and so I think now it's going to be much easier for our students to find those resources, but finding the confidence to ask for help, to look for that help is really, really important. And don't wait till you're in the middle of the crisis and it's too much. Ask as soon as you step foot onto that campus, like, where are my best resources? Who are the best mentors and the tutoring and all of the things. So yeah, I will say I did not have the best coping mechanisms and know how to navigate when I was going through the first 7 years of my education. But I think it would have helped if I had the confidence to ask for help. I think it also would have helped if predominantly white institutions would integrate the culture of the Indigenous peoples within the territory that their campus reside, infuse it into campus culture, have student centers for our Native students, have elders in residence, as Melissa talked about. Those institutions should be doing more to bring that to campus and not putting the weight of that on our students to bring with them to campus. So twofold, yes. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed hearing your answers for that question. I really took, two big things away of just Melissa talking about that come and breathe in some of those spaces. That really resonated with me being in my own undergrad experience. So, and then, the ending you had, Erica, too, talking about it's not on the students to bring with them. So just doing that work as institutions and in the spaces. So let's kind of move into the next question, which is, what are ways that Indigenous students can claim their education when feelings of doubt arise?
Again, excellent thesis question. Ready for my 50-page response. I really think that it's not necessarily something like what Erica just ended with. I think it's something that the institutions need to hold up that mirror and say, what are we doing for our students? What are we doing for our Indigenous students? Because I mean, you're going to come into a classroom and you're going to deal with so many things. You're going to doubt. I'm not trying to be like negative or anything, but occasionally doubt is going to arise. It's going to happen. You're going to be like, oh my gosh, you're going to feel, is this my space? Am I in the right major? Am I even in the right class sometimes? And so I think it's making sure that institutions are aware of these struggles that Indigenous students face, and making sure that they have the supports for them, because it's not necessarily, you're already doing so much in class. You made the initiative to get there. You got in. Holy cow! If you move, that's even bigger. You're making yourself go to class every day. And then, you're probably looking at maybe being tokenized every now and then because, you're in history class and everybody turns and looks at you, or, so I think it's about the institutions and figuring out what they can do for their students when those moments happen, and making sure that they have safety nets, and that'll help with everybody. It'll help students stay in class. It'll help with retention rates, all that great stuff.
I love where Natasha's going with the PhD, because I'm like, oh, just write it all right here, right? Again, I think she was spot on, right? Like, it shouldn't be up to these 18, 19-year-olds who are trying to discover who they are. Being away from home for the first time is huge, right? And we think about brain development, like they're still developing and still becoming these amazing little humans. So again, putting it back on the universities and even the surrounding communities, like what can they do to ensure this space is successful for Native students? And I work in public health, and I always reference, like, growing up with using IHS, like, never saw a poster with a Native body on it, right? Never was reflected. So it's like, how can we help universities and institutions take it a step further? Like, what is the action behind a land acknowledgement? What is the action behind, having the tribal flags represented in the school somewhere? There has to be so much more that our institutions can be doing. I look at where TCUs are now, and it's just like, man, to be able to go there and know that it's nothing, majority Native students, you have the opportunity to learn your language, the culture. It's like, how can some of that be fused into these larger land grant institutions? And like you said, you don't be the token person, but also don't make the one Native faculty that token either, or the one, counselor or, recruiter that's American Indian. Like, it has to be a learned process for so many people. And not only are at 18, 19, 20, you're discovering who you are and what your passions are and what you might be good at, and where your path is going to take you. But you're learning so much else in your identity as well. So seeing where those intersections are and how those become who these amazing humans who are going to be taking care of us when we're older.
Yeah, I'm going to stay on that theme. So, of course, we want our children to know that, they belong there. So, that or their part of it, as Natasha mentioned, like self-doubt, always reminding our children who are the students that they belong. And many times that's their land that they are existing on and going to school on, and everyone else is a guest. And so just reiterating that for them as much as you can. But again, the institution, and I'm glad Melissa brought up land grants. We have land grants in every state, and I can only think of 2 that take the funding annually that they receive from that land to put back into those tribal communities. I can, off of the top of my head, and I apologize for any land grant who is doing this and is not in my mind as I say it, but 2, I know of 2, and 1 that creates pathways for those students to have tuition free. And so because of those funds that they take from the revenue from the land. So I think all mainstream institutions have a responsibility to, as we've all just mentioned here, have a pathway for the tribal community members to become fluent in the languages, provide and help with those resources, infuse the culture. If you're in South Dakota, that's the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota culture you should be having on your campus. That is the institution's responsibility, in my opinion. Make it a safe and welcoming space for our students to be in that campus. And so often it is just like that one person or that one building that allows a student to go into to just breathe. As Melissa said, she should have been able to breathe, exhale wherever she needed to on that campus. And so that says a great deal about our institutions, no matter how progressive they are, no matter how well-meaning they are, no matter how above the status quo they are with meeting some of these needs, they are not there yet. And so when we have campuses across the country that any one of our students can step foot on and not feel othered and not feel like they can't breathe, that's when I think we'll be in a good space, when that's no longer an issue.
Thank you all again. Next question is, why is it important for students to connect with resources on campus? And what are ways that they can engage with those resources?
Right now is a beautiful time to be in college, mainly because we have the internet at the tips of our fingers. So a lot of supports typically are being shared on your campus website, your campus news feed, be it on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all that good stuff. So that is way helpful, because I know you used to start on a cork board and figure out, staring at a cork board, where can I find a tutor, where can I find the writing center? And so now those things are kind of like available at the tips of your finger. We have a lot of programs out there in various campuses. We have the TRIO student support. There are writing centers on various campuses. There are so many things that are available as even student groups. And so being able to find those places, connect with them, and really find a home in them, find a place that you're comfortable with, even finding that right tutor, taking advantages of opportunities that are presented to you as an American Indian student, especially if you're a first gen. There are so many programs that are available. So just making sure that they're also resources really need to be shared by the institutions too, making sure that that's probably should be in the welcome packet if they check the mark American Indian.
It's like, yep, keep going, Natasha. And to add to that, right, like, I think students can be a resource, right? You know, again, not being that token, but what is that resource that, you know, they might have with another Native student that they've never met? I think I can admit, you know, coming from South Dakota, not realizing how many amazing different tribal nations and cultures and languages there were, and just that learning in itself is amazing. And to be able to come from that grounded space of who you are and to share that with others who might be, you know, learning who they are, that connection to their tribe. And then also we all have, right, both positive, negative experiences of who we were in high school, then coming to college. We all come with historical trauma, that's current trauma. So being able to see those resources, and again, that resiliency, right? Being able to have resources for these students to maintain success, right? And it's going to ebb and flow. Like, you know, both of them have talked about, like, there's always going to be things that impact our going to class or, you know, getting that A, but knowing that we're going to continue and having those resources on campus or within our community. Love the idea of that welcome packet. And just feeling comforted that we're in this space that's for us.
Yeah, I don't know what to add since they hit on all that. I think, yeah, I guess I'll stick to the same theme. As Natasha said, like, there should be intentional recruitment that includes, you know, all the resources that are available when someone applies and they check that box and you set them up for a tour. If you have an American Indian Student Center, make sure you're taking them on the tour. Make sure you're introducing and including those Indigenous faculty and staff across campus that do work within those departments, that will be there for those students. But yeah, I think it is not, again, the student's responsibility to seek out the resources. We should be having them more readily available. But, you know, in ensuring that our students do feel confident enough to ask for help or ask where things are. I think the partnerships with those mainstream institutions, with the tribal colleges or just the tribal communities, if there is not a tribal college in or around that tribal community, are really important, because this is what they could be providing, working with those tribes, providing all of these resources and pathways and institutional knowledge that'll help, so that both sides of that coin can be helping the students be prepared. So better communication and relationships with the tribal communities around those mainstream institutions, and especially the tribal colleges, if they exist in that area, are really important for that resource piece.
Thank you again. I think I really like the theme that has been going around, specifically with this question, but even just with some of the other conversations we had around the other questions, is just that it's not on the student. So I think that's really validating to hear, and resonating to hear with someone that was an Indigenous student, but also in the role of serving Indigenous students. And so knowing that work isn't on them, and they have that opportunity to feel comfortable and welcomed in asking those questions, but one that has to start with our institution and the resources we have to make them feel like they can ask those questions. So next question is, here at Minneapolis College, we have identity specific programs for students to feel welcome, safe, and a valued part of the community. Why is it important to have these spaces?
representation is really vital when it comes to your, I guess, when you're trying to figure out who you are and what you want to do. And if you don't see somebody that looks like you or has reflects the same values that you have, then it's going to be hard to really find your space. And so if you're able to connect with an American Indian student organization on your campus or in your community, I think that's really helpful to help network, find your own little, create your own community within your campus, people that support you, people that understand your, I guess, where you come from, any extenuating circumstances. I think college is where you really find a lot of your peers and your friends that you kind of connect with for like a lifetime. And so I think it's really important to have these types of clubs. And if you don't have one on campus, I encourage you to go start one. Don't be afraid. I'm sure there are other students out there in the community that want that connection too.
I think about who we are as Native people, right? We're not individualistic, we're community oriented, right? Family oriented. We've all talked about our families. So I think those resources in that space is just an extension of who we are as Native people, and that need for it to feel comfort, to feel like this is for us. Yeah, I wouldn't go to, I feel like we answered the question in the previous one when I go back to these ones. I was like, oh, I already talked about that. I love, being able to start something that isn't there. And again, there's just so many opportunities to find out who you are in college, and outside of even just the coursework, but like the student union, sports. There's so much, I think, compared to what was there when I was in undergrad, which is an amazing opportunity. It can also be overwhelming. So knowing when to step back, knowing to know what is okay for you to be like, oh, too much, right? Especially with the classes as well. And, I also think about like, who created the 4-year degree model? I mean, one, we don't want to be there because of the financial burden of being there any longer. But it's like, again, who was that 4-year model meant for? Probably not Native people, probably not Black people, like, again, right? And so being able to shift that and be okay with whether or not it takes 4.5, 7 years, right? To see that it took 7 years, but she's got a PhD. I'm just like, that is amazing. And then to have to do that with kids, like, kudos to both of you. Like, all I had to do was write my thesis when I had my son in my belly, and that was hard. So, right, finish your degree before you have kiddos. That just will definitely ease the burden, but you can do it. I think it's definitely not achievable.
Yeah, it's hard to, I guess the simplest answer is that, as Melissa put it, our education system was not created for us, by us. It was created by the dominant culture, the dominant peoples, those that received the privileges. And so when we think of those campuses, we're now trying to assimilate students from all backgrounds, all cultures, all ethnicities, all races. And so I think remembering that education is not like a one-size-fits-all. Every student is different, and finding ways to meet all students where they're at is important. I think there's just another layer of that when you're talking about Native students that exist in a space where this is their ancestral land. This is their, this was once their way of life, and there was our own ways of teaching and learning. And so we're still trying to have or face that sort of juxtaposition of like, this was ours, now it's not, and we now still need to attend and obtain the degree. And so I think ensuring that you are creating spaces that acknowledge, not just represent, but acknowledge and celebrate those differences, and that all of our students not just our Native students, should be learning and being educated on those that were here before them. I think so much of this othering and racism and stereotypical ways in which they view Native people would also be eradicated if we taught more openly the history, a comprehensive history, the most factual history, and also creating those spaces on campus where all students can go and learn about the Native people, in which the territory in which they are now going to school, which was their ancestral land. So I think, yes, I think we need to know that in general, all students learn differently. We require certain pieces, students learn better when they're in a safe space, when they're fed, when they have shelter, all of these things. And that goes on when we go into college. So I think ensuring that those spaces are there for our students are really important. So.
Next question we have is, what ways can faculty and staff support and advocate for Indigenous students?
This one's a good one. I think that, well, I've heard this talked about on another panel that I was watching, is understanding that there are Indigenous ways of knowing, and it's not just exclusive to the NAS department. You can. That's what I found. Whoops, my watch is talking to me. But knowing that we had Indigenous scientists, Indigenous botanists, all the way around, that we had everything that you could think of prior to colonization. And now when we're in higher ed, anything that is related to Indigenous people automatically goes under anthropology or the NAS department. And so I think being able to realize that our Indigenous culture can be infused or should be infused into every other department as well, not just specific to NAS and anthropology.
Again, as a mom, I have a 10 and a 12-year-old. Am I on mute? No. Right, my daughter is 12, typical development, typical learning, right? And then my 10-year-old has ADHD, has been diagnosed on the spectrum on a few tests. So it's like, right, navigating his IEP as his parent. So it's like, for me, it's like, man, how's he gonna do when he goes to college, right? Or even, even my daughter, right? Like, so to think about, one, even me looking back, I was never a test taker. Like, it gives me anxiety. So it's like, how do we really see what students need to be successful in the classroom? And to see our Indigenous ways in everything, like she said, right? My undergrad's in child psych, and I remember just going to these classes. I'm like, man, this clicks because it resonates with who I am as a Native person, but there was no conversation of being Native, right? Being a Head Start kiddo, I was like, I'm gonna work in Head Start. So it's always taking it back to that, but there wasn't anyone that helped me navigate that. And so I think, man, if I would have had that support, like where my path would have taken me. So again, it's not about individualizing our learning, but then it is, right? Because how do we have faculty and staff who are really there to help freshmen, sophomore, juniors, and seniors be successful in the path that they're at?
Well, I guess I'll say, I think the first thing that faculty and staff could do is to listen and believe our students. When our students come to a faculty or staff member and say, a thing happened, or I feel a way when I'm experiencing this in class, like, believe them, like, validate them, and then advocate with that student in mind. What do you want? What do you want out of this situation? Do you want me to go talk to the faculty? Do you want me to, go with you? Do you want me to help you formulate an email? Like, don't just listen and then let them walk out your door with not validating to help make sure that something with this situation is going to be resolved. So I see that so often, students saying, well, I told so-and-so, but there was no proof or there was no facts. And so we have decades of our students saying a thing that's never believed. So I think that's the first step that our faculty and staff can do. But again, back to the institution, they should be providing the cultural competency for all faculty and staff across campus so that faculty and staff are better prepared to handle the situations when something this comes forth to them. And so this is supporting and helping your faculty and staff too. If the institution puts the effort into supporting faculty and staff with professional development, culturally responsive engagement with all populations of students, you're going to see less of these issues and more faculty and staff prepared to know what to do when they're faced with it. But again, the first step I just say is that they need to listen. They need to believe our students. And then lastly, I think we all should know that as educators, those of us that were educators, we never stop learning, we never stop growing. Don't assume that you are the expert in all things. If you don't know a thing about that student's culture and it is pertinent, you should be taking the time to learn on your own and not require the student to help you or to teach you. And if your institution does not provide that professional training, professional development, you should be always seeking to do that for yourself so that you're a better faculty and staff member for all of your students.
Thank you for that. I forgot I realized I was facilitating. I got so into what you were saying. And next question we have for you all is how can college, and so kind of looking at, we looked at the faculty and the staff support and more of the, never want to say smaller, but more of the direct support, I think, in that way. And then the next question kind of focuses on a bigger, larger scale of how can college and universities better serve our Indigenous students? And then what does this look like, feel like, and sound like?
Gosh, I feel like we've covered so many aspects of this, like just making sure that you are aware that you have an Indigenous population. Sometimes, depending on how data is gathered, you may not know that you have an Indigenous student in your class. I don't know if this is across the board, but typically if you check those boxes and you pick more than one, and one of those is Native American / American Indian, Alaska Native, if you pick another one, likely you're going to get put in this box called other or miscellaneous or something else, if you will. And so depending how the data is collected, you may or may not know that you have an Indigenous student in your classroom. So there's the first one. And then on top of that, you should always acknowledge, this is crazy. We talk about land acknowledgement all the time, but not only acknowledging the land, but acknowledging the people and knowing that they're contemporary people, they're still living and thriving. And you should probably go out and meet that community. You should probably go out and do some research of your own as an institution. Don't just leave it on the faculty and the staff. Administration needs to get out there too. Volunteer, spend some time with the people, and then bring back what you learned and actually reflect. Don't just say you're there for diversity and equity and inclusion. Be about it. Don't talk it, be it.
Again, just ditto, and then I could mute myself, but to take it right, to add to that amazing context and overview is, I think about what are those required classes again, or understanding, like for non-native students, like what land they're on, right? Like, why isn't it a requirement to know the history of that land or to understand that? Because we look at states that are taking away history classes, right? It's like, dang, why? But yet you want me to learn how to write in cursive, like why? Right? So revisiting what are some of our requirements and what does it mean to be inclusive, to bring equity into the classroom, into your institution. I was reading some stuff up before this, and it was one of the things that I was like, oh, that's really cool, is like, do the institutions within the state have MOUs or understandings that they connect with the tribes in that state? Like, I think that would be amazing, not only for the undergraduates, but for that community as well, to have that connection to that institution, and being able to that co-learn or, co-share in some capacity. And again, not only like, Natasha was talking about the data, but it's like, how do we bring about the good data, right? That we know the graduation rate for Native students is low, but it's like, how do you pull out the ones that are graduating and keep them connected to the university? Because I always get alumni stuff and I was like, meh, like, not me, but right. I'm always like, man, I moved back to the Twin Cities as an adult with kiddos. Like, where can I connect to, bring whatever to the students there now? Is there a way to do that? Even if I didn't live here, is there a way for me to connect to support students in some capacity? I get we're all busy, right? We're all zoomed out, but I think to be intentional as a graduate of the university, I would love to give back to the students because we know what experiences we had. And so just to be able to be that extra helping hand, I think would be awesome.
Yeah, everything they said. And then I guess I'll say, and this goes back to Natasha's like, be about it, right? So often we see institutions, especially right now, I feel like there's an uptick, a trendiness of institutions wanting to say they're recruiting higher numbers of Native students, or they're enrolling higher numbers of Native students in these programs, and we're graduating this many students. But I feel like that again is still just treating those students as a number and something that's going to benefit the institution, and instead of thinking of this work as holistic. What are you doing to create as we mentioned in all the other questions, what are you doing to actively, intentionally prepare faculty and staff across campus for your Indigenous students? How are you educating campus to appropriately engage with our students? When you're recruiting our students, are you ensuring that they have all the resources and preparedness they need to be successful at your institution? Or do you only care because they're going to help you that year with looking like you have a really good number of Native students coming to campus? And so if your intent is good and it's there for the right reason, the impact is going to follow. I think so that's really important for the institutions to ask themselves. I'll reiterate that they should be going out and creating those relationships with the tribal colleges and the tribal communities. I'll say lastly, I'm in a state and a state that, as Melissa mentioned, they're actively, and I actually had to leave academia at one point because the state began fighting against diversity, and they removed diversity offices. And when I said, when it comes to this institution, I'm not going to stay silent, they didn't believe me and were irate when I did speak out. And eventually, in a way that I had to remove myself from that institution. And shortly after that, I saw that the same governor, the same state are actively removing Oceti Shakui standards from the K through 12 curriculum. So I think we can look across the state and we see the institutions boasting DEI work, boasting that they care about the Indigenous populations and the students that are coming to their campus. But what were they doing when the governor in the state was pushing back against the diversity offices? Or what are they doing now? They may not be a K through 12 education system, but the K through 12 system matters tremendously for the success of our students, all of our students, when they meet, the requirements for college. And when, how are we remaining silent when that's happening as institutions of higher learning, watching it. And I think this goes back to the question that you asked, like, how do you be an ally? You can never name yourself an ally. Your actions and what you do for those people whom you're allying or advocating for is what's going to matter all day. We can say, I'm for Indigenous people and I am an ally, but what steps have you made to advocate on their behalf, or put yourselves in harm's way so that we aren't always the one carrying the burden to fight for our people or for our culture or for our languages to stay in the education system. So that to me is just, no, you cannot be a self-identified ally. It's through the work and the experience and the action, and those institutions should be pushing back more and providing those advocacies for the Indigenous peoples within their state.
Thank you all. That's so beautiful. Thank you, Erica. No, I think you led us right into our last question as well. So that is our last question, just kind of focusing around allyship and what that means. And you started us off great, Erica. So thank you for that. But the question is, you know, what does it mean to be that ally to our Indigenous communities? And then, you know, what does that look like in practice? And so you spoke on a little bit of that. And then how do we start those conversations? So, I mean, I really like the theme where you went, but, you know, for Natasha, Melissa, what would you like to add to that?
I think it's going beyond the hashtag and the social media shares. I mean, it's great to see that we can get numbers in those hashtags and maybe go viral for a day, but it's actions. It's being an active learner. It's realizing that there's so much more than a catchy phrase or than a picture you share on your social media. It's, again, actively learning about the communities that surround you. Maybe even asking yourself, why does this name change really bother me? You know, like, you know, we have people really up in arms here because we reverted back to Bade Makaska, and they were like, what do you mean you're erasing history? And so really coming to terms with like why things need to be acknowledged in their original place name, understanding the connection between Native language and culture, understanding the long history between, or it's not like a long history, but it's kind of like a bad relationship that we're kind of easing back into with education. It's not like it was something that we were like, oh, great, we're going to go to school today. It was forced, it was assimilation. And so we're coming into modern times. And so we understand that, you know, the Western way is here to stay. So we got to walk in those two worlds. And it's really hard to navigate if you don't have people championing for you, who don't not only share your point of view, but also promote it. And so again, it's just going beyond the hashtag.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. Again, I feel like we answered a lot of these, but I think, you know, again, not only renaming today, but it's like, have you looked at your buildings and what you call them? Do they all need to be looked at and renamed, right? Based on all these historical names that, again, were harmful to so many people. I think that's a start. And what are you doing 365 days a year? What are you doing on Thanksgiving Day? Like, again, it's always something that should be in conversation and always occurring and always educating. Yeah, again, there's so many ways to be a good ally, but I really liked what Erica talked about earlier, and you know, how she brought this into conversation. So I won't add too much more.
Well, thank you all so much. Erica, you're good. Sounds good. You got to start it. So thank you. you know, I could sit here all day and hear from you ladies and connect with you. And so I just want to thank you for answering all those questions and being on the panel. We're going to move into kind of a Q&A period. So I know that we have some questions already in the chat. I do have a few people around me too. So if they have any questions, I'll open it up too. But let's start with the chat here and see what we have. Just trying to look at some of the ones we might have already answered. So this one says, do you think Indigenous students will be treated fairly in the coming future in the workplace or in school?
Well, I guess I'll go. Our hope is yes. I'm sorry, my thing says unstable connection. Our hope, yes, is that that's why we're doing this work, those of us that are in education, so that we can ensure that progress continues to be made. And so I guess the short answer is yes. I think also it ties back to something Melissa mentioned, which is crucial. We view our students through a deficit lens. We are always looking at our Native population as they have the lowest, enrollment, lowest persistence, lowest graduation. And we talk about that without the nuance of like historical context and generational trauma, as Melissa mentioned. Our students, whether it's their first day they showed up on campus, or one of my PhD students who is studying the Arctic ice for climate change purposes. Another is trying to decolonize biology curriculum, who's also a doctoral student. Like, we have amazing students that are doing amazing work. And every day that one of them persists is a positive, is an amazing celebration that all of us should be celebrating, and not always just viewing it through that lens of they aren't, getting high enough graduation rates, especially without the conversation as to how did we end up here and whose responsibility it is to create a better place for our students. And so those of us on this panel are going to continue to work towards ensuring that those students are seen in a good way and treated in a good way. So yes, we hope so.
I agree, because we're going to be the elders soon and we're coming for them if they don't.
I'll say ditto so we can get to another question because they answered that beautifully.
Thank you. So this next one is asking, what types of racism are they facing? Can you be more specific for someone who'd be wanting to understand more?
I'll go first again. So when we think of racism, I think our students are experiencing, first of all, I am white presenting because my mama's white, so I have a privilege I didn't earn. And so some of us do go onto campus and don't experience what we would refer to as sort of overt violent racism of that we see that are more phenotypically Native relatives experience. But we know in this country, Black and Native folks, especially darker, because we're going to talk about colorism, anti-Blackness. The darker you are, the more non-Eurocentric, you look. You're going to experience that sort of violent othering that we know that has existed, and so that doesn't disappear when they enter the classroom. What we do and have seen working in that field with my students, the names that they're referred to, we've had students yelling out dorm rooms, calling them racial derogatory names. We have faculty who have to be reprimanded for things that they say that are stereotypical microaggressions against entire Native populations. And then in general, our students walk onto a campus and they're expected to act a certain way, because if they don't act a certain way, that means all Native students are bad. When no white student walks onto a campus and has to feel like whatever action they portray is going to reflect badly on all white students. And so we have Native students going to campus needing to carry the weight of carrying on and persisting for their own people, and then ensuring that they don't make their people look bad because of the way that they're viewed. And then, as I said, the microaggressions and the derogatory racial names for our students are just some of the ways I've seen our students experience racism.
Right, sometimes it's hard to explain, but you know, we all know it's there, and especially as parents, right? It's like, how are we preparing our children to be successful, to be these amazing, respectful, kind little humans? But then I look at my children who are, you know, Meskwaki, Dakota, but they're also Black. So it's like, when do you look at my son from being this cute little dark-skinned baby to a threat? Because that happens, right? And that is how every kid of color experiences at some point in their life. So to think about those moments of having to walk, you know, down campus, like they all will experience that at some point in their life, which is scary because I have to think about, can't hold him. I always say, I'm going to put my son on my back, just take him with me, but it's not reality. So there is that fear, because that is real.
I don't know if you recall, but it was a couple of years ago that these young Native boys in Colorado had joined a campus tour, and they showed up kind of late. And one of the parents had called the campus police, and the kids were retained and they were questioned, and they were just like, we're just trying to go on a campus tour. And so that wasn't too far long ago. And this was in Colorado, a state that you would think that they would be aware that there are brown people in. So it's not a perfect place, but it's still happening. Especially we're in the Twin Cities, and there's so much that has happened here. So it's there. It might be thinly veiled racism, it might be microaggressions, but just being aware and finding your space and having people and knowing that you can call on an ally, call on a friend, making sure people know where you are and where you're at. I mean, so many things that are happening. So not only are you trying to get your education, but you got to think about safety.
Thank you for answering that. I think that gave us a lot of different thoughts and just takeaways. And so really appreciate those answers. Let's look at a couple other ones here. This one, you know, a student asked as well, what was the transition after college into the workplace, which I think is really good, especially thinking about MCTC in specific, us being a community college and people at different points and paths of their lives, and what that will look like when they transition into a career and workplace.
After phase one of college, I was working, like that was just finding jobs. And that's mainly because I felt like well, at the time I didn't really complete my entire, all of college. But after phase two, when I was successfully finished, I think that's where I was finding my career pathways. And I think I credit that to actually having a work study job and having a good connection with my work studies supervisor, because the job that I'm currently in and the job that I previously had, I wasn't looking for them. They found me. And so I was really thankful that I had people that saw me on my pathway, knew that there was, you know, something there, mentors, if you will, and brought me along for the way. So I think that's a big thing is now that there's more of us educated natives out there, that we're actually going to be able to pull people along with us and create a stronger workforce and career pathway for those that are coming behind us.
Yeah, I think I agree with Natasha. After I graduated, it was like, well, I mean, it took me 100 years just to get through undergraduate. So most of that was convincing my mom to still let me stay at the house and just keep paying for me. But I would get jobs. And then I think I went into teaching because I thought, what else is there? And so I just started teaching. I was teaching history at the community college for quite a few years before I realized, yeah, I can make a difference in the classroom, but maybe there's just so much more I could be doing outside of the classroom. And that's when I decided to switch from academic affairs to student affairs to be more connected with the students. So I think after graduating, it was kind of like still another season of figuring out like who I am and where I'm going. And eventually I figured it out, like much longer than my mother would have liked me to, but I'm here. So that's all that matters.
Yeah, again, looking back at being a freshman, and I didn't even, honestly, I was like, what did I even like want to come to school for? Like, right, that I'm a first generation college student, right? My mom, amazing, got her GED. And so it's like navigating this space alone, but also, being so close to your parents. And so I look back and, got my degree. And then you're like, okay, well, what do you do with a child psych? Or what do you do with a minor in American Indian Studies? And I'm wondering if there's a way, because, right, we also didn't come into college with, I'm going to do this in 4 years, then I'm going to do this, and then this is my path, and cool. All of a sudden, I know when I'm going to retire at 50, like that's not Native people, because we function in the right now moment so often. And so being able to be in that place where we can give our children that realistic of, hey, these are your opportunities. This is, what you could have. What do you think? Right. I didn't have that. I was thankful I did have Upward Bound again. I think that was played a huge role in me coming to college. But again, that missing key, because I too like bounced around with jobs. And then I was like, well, I'm gonna go for a master's. Never confident in anything I did under 30, but I, kept going. But I only knew one friend who started college with me, and I can remember this conversation. And I don't know if either of you know Jackie Blackbird, but she started at the U, and she was like, you know what? I'm gonna work for the Twins. I'm gonna do this. And I was just like blown away by her goals. She's like, I'm gonna work for Nike one day. She worked for Nike, the Timberwolves, the Twins. Like, this is somebody I was just like, how did you do it, Jackie? Like, I want to know your ways so I can help my kiddos learn that, because they're the only Native person I knew at my age that had a plan and had a path. So I think that's key.
Thank you. Well, I know there's a couple questions here. As we're getting close to the 3 o'clock hour, we'll probably wrap up with 2 other questions. One was kind of in response to Melissa. So how to stay connected to colleges and help students participating in this conversation is a great way. I don't think that was part of the question, so sorry. But how to stay connected to colleges and help students, and then help the institution too. So I guess what feedback do you have on that, Melissa? I think I read some of her comments, so I can kind of say the question again too.
Say the question again, like how
Yeah.
can we help the institution keep us connected?
Yeah, I guess it says how to stay connected to colleges and help students.
I think it has to go beyond, right, the alumni that goes to every student that graduates, but is there Native alumni systems, especially in these large institutions, that can keep us connected even as professionals? And maybe it does exist and I just didn't know, but again, that's such a huge part of who we are, and those connections and friendships that we made, that we, all three of us probably have maintained. So it's like, how can we connect with one another and bring that back to students?
Yeah.
I guess that's one way I can think of. I don't know if Natasha or Erica have a suggestion as well.
Well, I was lucky to land into the American Indian College Fund. So that is literally my job, is to champion for our students, our Native students in college. And it's a good way to really understand like the nuances of navigating through higher education, is understanding what the students are currently going through, what their current needs are, and understanding how we can work on improvement for pathways for careers, and also providing, the American Indian College Fund does this really cool careers pathway program. They're expanding beyond the scholarship, and I think that's a really good way to help you find people that can help you get to where you are, or get to where you want to be in your goals, and also providing a network of people behind that. So I think it's really cool, because you could probably be able to connect with people on different campuses, different institutions, different types of institutions, be it a technical college, a tribal college, or a mainstream college.
Yeah, same. I think, like Natasha, I work for the American Indian Higher Education Consortium, so I'm working every day with the tribal colleges. But I think outside of like what we do for work, I like live like 2 blocks from the campus. So anytime like the American Indian Student Center like puts on like lunch sales, Happy Wednesdays, I try to go and support when they do the Wachipis. They're getting ready to do the Missing Murdered Indigenous Women's walk. So like I just try to be present still in the spaces, so that they see that the community members that are near the institution, they're not staff and faculty, they're just the community members who are trying to engage and stay a part of it. It's helped cultivate relationships with those students. Now when they need things, they know a community member that, I've loaned my truck for them to go back, when they had a relative pass, and or when they need to pick up a child. And so when you follow the relationship authentically, really beautiful things can come out of that. And so now I'm not just the random person who shows up for their Indian taco sale. I'm sharing in their life outside of campus as well. So just taking that extra step to be a part of even the little programs that they put on, to just show them that you support them.
Great, thank you. Well, I appreciate all your time. We do have one last question for you to end on. That I have someone in the room. So the question that they're asking is, navigating the intersection of being a woman and being Indigenous, how did you navigate white male dominated spaces? Again, maybe Natasha, this could be another thesis question though.
That's funny. I'm in the position that I'm in because my field is dominated by nothing but white male older people. I went to school to be an anthropologist / archaeologist, and I never thought this was where I would end up. So it's been interesting. I figured if I can't beat them, I guess I'll teach them. So eventually that's my goal, is to go to go
Love
back
that.
and teach.
Man, that's how we're ending. I think what comes to mind is strength in numbers, right? Like, again, knowing we don't have to go in those rooms alone. We don't have to, I guess, as best we can, not be in those spaces alone, and ensure like these opportunities where we can come together and join forces, I guess. But yeah, that's a hard one, because I think it's going to continue to be there. So finding those ways and building strong little Native women that we are in our homes right now too will be helpful.
Yeah, I'll say I didn't have like all of like the mentors, like female mentors, strong women to help me like inside, you know, obviously my mother and them, but I mean, in the workplace, it was always an older white male who was the leader, and very rarely did I see them ever want to like help mold, shape, and guide one of us women up through the ladder. And so I did seek out and I did find strong women much later in my life, in my career, who have helped. But the loss or the not having it made me know that that's who I was going to actively be. And so while I didn't have that, that's how I treat my staff or my students. Because what is the saying, when, you know, if you go up, like, don't forget to reach back and take someone with you. I didn't have that. And I see so many times in this like society, like, well, I had to struggle, you have, then you should struggle. And I'm like, no, I didn't have this. So I want to make sure that you have it. And also, like, remember, the students, these our Indigenous students who we want to see one day become these, you know, strong, confident professionals, are the professionals that we're now working with, or that are our staff members. And so we should still be treating them the way we would have, you know, wanted our students to be treated. Those students are one day going to be those professionals that we should be helping mentor. And so, yes, I had to actively seek out the women in my field. Not all of them were willing to be mentors or to support and see you as competition, instead of someone else I can make sure that there's another woman in this field doing this work. So that's how I handle, just try to put back and help the women around me.
So yeah, heavy way to maybe end, but also a great thoughts to leave with. So again, thank you all for being here, Natasha, Melissa, and Erica. It was an honor to connect with you over this hour and hear your responses to these questions and just have your time. I know that there was a few questions that were added to the chat. And so I just encourage everyone that participated and that came to the panel to continue these conversations. You know, here at Minneapolis College, you're welcome to stop in our space at any time. If you're interested in knowing more about these organizations that these ladies work at and connecting to more resources in these conversations, feel free to reach out to me. And I'm sure, not to put you all out there, but you all would want to continue the conversation in different ways. You know, it is a part of our work, but it's not all of our work. And so it's not all on us as well. So doing this as a whole, as a community, we encourage everyone to put that work on themselves as well, and start those conversations and ask those questions. So again, thank you all for being here, and I look forward to connecting with you more in the future and having you at Minneapolis College again.
Thank you.
Yeah, enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye.